They'd tortured her crew for days, shot down her bird with a surface-to-air missile, left her bleeding in the snow at 10,000 feet, and when she still wouldn't stay down, they learned the hard way that Navy SEALs don't need wings. They just need one more breath and a reason to climb, because hours later, frostbitten, half-conscious, and still moving uphill, she turned a crash site into a kill zone. And what happened next wasn't survival. It was a comeback. Now, before we show you how she turned altitude into an advantage and ice into a weapon, hit that subscribe button, tap the bell icon, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because this story didn't end in the mountains. It ended above them. The MH-60 shuddered through thin air just after 0600. Rotors chewing through cold that hadn't burned off yet. Below, the Spingar Mountains ran in broken ridges, snowmelt cutting through valleys like veins, frost still clinging to the peaks from last night's freeze. Inside the bird, everything hummed. Engines, static, boots against metal deck plating. The pilot muttered something into his mic about wind shear. The co-pilot tapped a readout twice, swore under his breath, tapped it again. Across from them, strapped into a jump seat behind two medics, sat a woman in desert fatigues, sleeves rolled tight, boots worn but clean, no weapons showing, no rank visible, just a name patch over her heart that read Vale, Lieutenant Commander Kira Vale, SEAL Aviation Liaison out of Coronado. 6 months off rotation after a training accident nobody talked about. Officially, she was listed as non-combat passenger. Unofficially, she'd rerouted herself onto this flight after seeing a logistics report that didn't add up. One of the crew engineers glanced over. "Still think this detour is worth it?" She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on the digital panel over the co-pilot's shoulder, altitude readings flickering, 2 ticks low for this corridor. The co-pilot adjusted manually, tapped the screen. Terrain radars ghosting? Backup? Running cold. Reset lag. Kira leaned forward slightly. "That's not lag. What is it?" "Reflection noise. Something's watching us." Before anyone could respond, the world snapped sideways. A concussive slam punched through the fuselage. Metal shrieked. The tail section twisted, then tore. Alarms screamed. Fire bloomed along the left engine cowling, flames licking back toward the cabin. "Missile strike! Tail's gone!" someone shouted. The MH-60 started spinning, fast. Kira grabbed the overhead strap as gravity broke apart, and one of the medics slammed into the bulkhead. An engineer screamed. The windshield flashed white. Panels tore loose. Wind howled through gaps that hadn't been there 10 seconds ago. "Brace!" But Kira had already dropped low, feet braced against the deck, one arm shielding her head as the aircraft bucked once, twice, then dropped like a stone. Through cloud cover, the helicopter plummeted in a sick spiral, trailing smoke and fire. No one spoke. There wasn't time. Just the shriek of tearing metal, the rush of freezing wind, and then impact. Silence. Smoke hit her lungs before her eyes opened. She coughed once, tasted copper, blinked. Everything hurt in that dull, distant way that meant adrenaline was still doing its job. One eye wouldn't open all the way. Blood on her face, shoulder screaming, but breathing, that was enough. The helicopter lay scattered across a shallow slope in pieces. Fuselage curled inward like something crushed from the inside. Rotor blades split and buried halfway down the ridge. One still spun slowly, ticking against frozen ground like a countdown she could hear, but not stop. She rolled onto her side, coughed again, tasted blood, but felt air moving, lungs intact. She did a quick mental inventory, the kind they drilled into her at SEER school until it became reflex. Fingers moved, toes responded, neck stable, vision blurry but clearing. She wasn't dead. That meant she had work to do. "Connor!" A shape stirred near what was left of the tail section. Petty Officer Connor, dragging himself out from under a twisted panel, groaning but moving. Beyond him, another crewman, alive, coughing blood, no sign of the pilot. Kira pushed herself up on her good arm, scanning the wreckage with the tactical precision. Hostile territory, downed aircraft, unknown enemy strength. No immediate fire from the ridge, which meant either they were still positioning Or they wanted something from the wreck first. Intel, equipment, prisoners. She had maybe 3 minutes before they reached the crash site. Her hand went to her thigh pocket. Trauma kit still there, sealed. Then her ankle. Backup blade secured in its sheath. The Glock on her hip had stayed holstered through impact. Small victories. Kira's boots crunched through shattered glass and scorched insulation as she crawled toward the cockpit. Fuel stink everywhere, dripping from torn lines, sparks popping from exposed wires. She cataloged the hazards automatically. Exposed electrical, ruptured fuel lines, structural instability. Then she heard it, a hiss, followed by a bubble of flame licking up the far wall. Fuel cell breach. Seconds left. The pilot was pinned in his harness, slumped forward, blood soaking his collar. One eye fluttered open when she reached him. "Hang on," she muttered. She pulled the rescue hook from her boot and started cutting. 3 cuts. One full body yank that made her shoulders shift wrongly enough that she nearly blacked out. But she kept pulling, dragged his weight across debris, out past the breach line, into snow. The rear of the fuselage lit up behind them. Fire roared like it had been holding its breath. Connor reached them seconds later, limping, one sleeve dark with blood. "We're 4 down, 2 confirmed dead, 1 trapped, 1 not moving." Kira scanned the wreck. No more screams, no more motion, just smoke and hissing metal. She reached for the comm unit clipped to her collar. Cracked housing, fried, no signal. The emergency beacon near the cockpit door was still blinking, weak but pulsing. Then she turned and her stomach dropped. 3 figures had appeared on the ridge above them, moving fast. Not American, not rescue. Armed, retrieval squad. Kira didn't waste time weighing options. No comms, no air cover, no defensive perimeter. She had a Glock, 2 mags, and a transponder that wouldn't hold signal through another ridgeline. "Weapons?" she asked. "Only yours," Connor said. "Everything else burned." She nodded once. "Take him and move down slope. Stay low. Follow the melt line. Get to tree cover." Connor hesitated. "And you?" "I'm going the other way." "You won't make it far." "That's not the point." She adjusted her grip on the Glock and turned toward the smoke, toward the ridge, because someone had to draw them off. And right now, they still didn't know who they'd just shot out of the sky. She moved fast and low, boots slipping in crushed snow, sidearm close to her ribs. No time for careful, just distance and noise. She'd learned a long time ago that evasion wasn't about speed. It was about rhythm, about reading terrain like sheet music and playing the notes wrong on purpose. First step, make yourself unpredictable. She ducked under a splintered section of tail, crouched beside the still smoking wreckage, and yanked the last unspent flare from the emergency kit. Casing cracked, but it would light. She jammed it under a chunk of metal soaked in rotor oil and snapped the cap. Red smoke billowed. Then she threw a handful of loose bolts into the fire and kicked a piece of fuselage off the ledge. It clattered down into the ravine below, echoing like boots scrambling downhill. From a distance, it would sound like someone running. She wasn't running. She was climbing. Opposite direction. Behind her, she heard voices, Pashto. 3 distinct speakers, maybe 4. They were arguing about which direction to pursue. The smoke was working. They thought she'd gone downhill with the others. She used the moment to check her gear. The Glock had 13 rounds left. Her knife was still sharp. The trauma kit had 1 tourniquet, a pack of Quick Clot, and 3 morphine syrettes. Not much, but more than she'd had in worse situations. Her right shoulder throbbed where it had impacted the bulkhead. Not dislocated yet, but close. She reached up, feeling for the joint, still seated, but the ligaments were screaming. One wrong move, and it would pop. She'd have to favor the left side for everything. 10 seconds later, she was 30 meters up and veering west, planting her feet where the snow broke shallow. Minimal tracks. She found a flat rock, used it to brush out the last of her boot prints, then wedged it back into place. Old tracker trick. Make them second guess what they're seeing. She stripped off her name patch and buried it under a rock. Let them think she was dead. Let them guess wrong. Above her, the mountain narrowed into jagged spine, ridges cresting into cloud cover. The insurgents were spreading out now, just visible, harnessing through gaps in the windblown snow. One raised binoculars, Another slung a rifle, pointing toward the smoke. A third was moving laterally, trying to cut off escape routes. Professional, not local militia. That changed the calculus. She kept moving. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Keep heart rate down. Keep muscles oxygenated. Don't run. Never run in the open. The slope ahead opened into a boulder field. Jagged rocks the size of cars. Gaps between them barely wide enough to squeeze through. Perfect. She moved through it like water, picking routes that would force pursuers into choke points, places where they couldn't bring rifles to bear without exposing themselves. Halfway through, she heard them close in behind her. Boots on stone, radio chatter. They were coordinating, trying to box her in. She dropped behind a boulder and waited, counted heartbeats. One of them appeared at the edge of the boulder field, rifle up, scanning. He was 40 meters out, too far for a pistol shot, but close enough that he'd spot her if she moved. She didn't move. The man turned his head, spoke into his radio, waited for a response, then he started forward, picking his way through the rocks. 30 meters, 25. Kira's hand went to her boot, found the backup blade, 7 inches of blackened steel. Silent. 20 meters. The man stopped, looking at something on the ground. Her boot print. He'd found one she'd missed. He keyed his radio again, voice excited. 15 meters. Then a sound split the air, distant but growing. Helicopter rotors. The man's head snapped up, searching the sky. Kira moved, not toward him, away. While his attention was divided, she slipped through a gap in the rocks and kept climbing. Behind her, she heard shouting. They'd spotted the helicopter, too. Good. Let them worry about air support. A flash of memory hit. Mud-covered instructor at Fort Bragg, spitting orders in a rainstorm. If they ground you, you become terrain. You think like dirt. You bleed like stone. You move like wind. Wind didn't leave a trail. Kira vaulted a boulder, slid behind a fir tree bent low from ice. 100 feet down the slope, 2 shadows approached the flare. She pressed back against bark, pulled her last broken flare from her vest, unscrewed the top. Striker damaged. No second chances. She jammed it into a chunk of still hot metal from the wreckage. The flare ignited. Then she threw it uphill toward a shallow snowbank and fired a single round from her Glock into a patch of ice 50 yards right. Crack! The combination worked. The insurgents heard the pop, saw the flare, fired at the snowbank. Their round hit. Boom! Concussive blast rolled down the slope. One of them went down hard, screaming, but Kira was already gone, sliding behind the next ridge. Then the storm came. Thick snow falling fast, visibility gone, sound distorted. She reached for her compass. Gone. Watch cracked. No way to call for help. Then her foot slipped. Ground disappeared. Before she could reach for anything solid, she was falling. Down a jagged rock shelf slicked with ice, breathless drop, crunch of ribs against stone. Then blackness. Pain dragged her back, not noise, not light, just pain. Kira didn't open her eyes right away. She listened, counted breaths, cataloged what still worked. Legs, functional. Ribs, broken. At least 2. Breathing hurt, but not collapsed. Left shoulder, good. Right, dislocated again. She opened one eye. The ravine she'd fallen into was narrow, half sheltered from the storm. Walls rose in jagged black angles, floor dusted in soft powder. Snow had muffled the impact. A splintered tree root jutted near her leg, could have skewered her if she'd landed 6 inches off. She pushed herself upright with one good arm, scarf gone, one glove missing, sidearm still there, one mag left. She kept it holstered. Cold was settling in fast. She needed fire. The wreckage had left scars all over the mountain. Luck found her one. Twisted fragment of avionics casing, jagged but intact. Inside, part of the locator battery housing still blinked. Faint green light, unsteady, not transmitting, but still holding charge. She dragged it under a rock ledge and went to work. Boot came off. She cut the heel with her knife, pulled out the steel support plate. Metal on metal, stripped 2 wires, twisted them into contact arc, began tapping, blade to plate, long, short, short, long, Morse, seal, seal, seal. If any drone or satellite was cycling passive detection, it might pick up the rhythmic interference. Long shot. But it was something. Next, fire. She'd carried hydraulic fluid in her pack, standard cold weather edition. Poured it onto a crushed helmet liner, sparked her knife against a cracked fuse from the panel. It caught, weakly, but it caught. She fed it dry pine twigs, breathing life into it like a dying engine. Warmth clawed at her skin, but the shadows behind her eyes stayed cold. She tore the remaining sleeve from her uniform, wrapped it around her midsection, pressed it against her ribs. Temporary brace, enough to move again. She didn't sleep. Couldn't. Hypothermia made sleep feel kind, like surrender. Instead, she counted. Then, above the wind, came a sound that didn't belong. Low hum, distant, but unmistakable. Rotor blades. She scrambled to her knees, clutching the locator housing, twisted the metal plate into a makeshift mirror, angled it upward. Tap, tap, tap. Then a voice. Faint, garbled, but real. Confirm, intermittent ping, survivor possible. She didn't smile. No energy left for that. She just braced her feet in the snow, grit her teeth, and started climbing. Inside the cockpit of the HH-60G Pavehawk circling Sector 12 Bravo, the combat rescue officer squinted at his console. Signal was faint, erratic, but too deliberate to be environmental. The pilot adjusted heading. Movement? Negative. No heat trail, but someone's broadcasting manual Morse. Repeating seal every 15 seconds. Crude, almost analog. Could be a trap. Could be someone they didn't finish. Pause. Take us down 200 feet. Get eyes on. The bird banked low, cutting across snow-laced ridges. Below, ravines and shattered tree lines blurred into fractured terrain. 12 hours since the last radar blip of the missing MH-60. Command had already started assuming the worst, until now. On the ground, Kira hauled herself onto an icy ledge, wind biting through every layer. The flare casing in her pouch was nearly frozen, but she snapped the chemical vial inside. Sickly green glow spread through the tube. She raised it high, arm trembling from the weight. Then she saw it, the shape, low and fast, matte gray body of a Pavy hawk slicing across the valley, the kind of silhouette you memorized first week in the field. She raised the flare higher, dropped to her knees beside a shallow rock pool, angled her knife toward the sun. Flash, 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 crude but rhythmic. The only language left when everything else was broken. Above, the co-pilot leaned out. Got something. Northwest ridge. Someone signaling. Human form. Small. Standing exposed. Solo? Appears solo. One heat signature nearby. Cold but rising. The rescue officer keyed his mic. Possible survivor. Flight suit, flare, mirrored signal, not hostile. Going in. But just as the bird lowered, crack, rifle fire. From below. Second volley hit the underside plating. Shallow but close. Insurgent fire opened from the tree line. Contact! 12 o'clock low! Kira didn't move. She rolled behind a boulder, drew the M4 she'd recovered near a dead crewman at the wreck site, fired 3 clean bursts down slope, controlled, no panic. Inside the Pavy Hawk, the crew watched the firefight unfold. She's engaging, the gunner said, covering our landing zone. You sure? Her fire's suppressive, not erratic. She's protecting the window. The rescue officer stared for a beat. That's not just any survivor. He leaned into his headset. Deploy ropes, send the winch, we're pulling her out. The crew moved fast. Rescue operator descended, scanning for friendlies. Reached her just as she pivoted back behind the rock. M4 hot and nearly out of ammo. You Navy? He shouted over rotor wash. She didn't answer. She pointed across the slope. Wounded crew, 800 meters downslope. Start with them. Then she holstered her rifle, clipped into the line, said flatly, I'll come last. The Pava Hawk lifted off with its nose low and rear ramp open, rotors thrashing the tree line. Below, the winch line swung with its last passenger, Lieutenant Commander Kira Vale. Strapped in, rifle slung, eyes never leaving the slope where she'd pointed. 2 survivors were already on board, bloodied, shaken, alive. She wasn't done yet. The crew chief grabbed her by the vest, hauled her inside, unclipped fast. She dropped to one knee, not to rest, but to listen. One ear to the floor, one hand on the hull. You feel that? She said. The gunner blinked. Feel what? She turned sharply. Pitch change. They're locking again. Already too late. A streak of smoke split the sky behind them. Sharp, rising, fast. Missile, rear vector. The chaff ejection triggered too slow. Impact, deafening blast tore through the aft section. Shrapnel ripped the ramp wall. One of the medics screamed as the fuselage buckled. Tail rotor sheared clean. The whole aircraft dropped. Didn't spin. Not yet. But it slammed into the valley hard, nose skidding sideways, kicking snow and ice into a clouded blizzard as the side rails groaned. Silence, then coughing, then shouting. Kira blinked through smoke, chest heaving. One crewman unconscious, slumped near the shattered comm station. Pilot not responding. Co-pilot trying to move, blood running from his scalp. Comms, offline, engines, dead. She pulled herself up and took control of the cabin. Check your weapons. Anyone mobile? I need eyes out now. 3 men responded. One with a broken arm. Another with burns across his sleeve. The third, a junior rescue tech, clutching his sidearm like it weighed 10 pounds. Kira ripped open the rear panel. 2 rifles, half a crate of loose mags, a laser pointer, 1 working IR strobe. She split the ammo. Then she looked at the slope. Footsteps, snow pressed in, 3 directions converging. They're coming, she said quietly. The burn tech looked at her. What do we do? She scanned the terrain. Tree cover too thin, valley too exposed. No line of sight for another bird, no signal bounce unless they moved. Ridge, she said, pointing upslope. Only place with direct view. We climb, we get signal. We stay, we get flanked. But we're grounded, she stared at him. No one said anything about flying. Her voice was calm, measured, but her breath was tight, ribs on fire. Still, she moved, fast. She took point through the brush, setting fire breaks behind them with fuel packets from the emergency kit. Their movements were staggered, uneven. 4 semi-fit personnel and a woman barely holding her shoulder together with a field wrap. But she'd seen worse. Done worse. She activated the strobe, clipped it to her pack, pulled the laser pointer. Wings aren't what get you home, she muttered. The tech beside her gave a shaky laugh. Then what does? She didn't blink. Lift. And she started to climb. The slope rose in jagged stabs of rock and ice, each foothold looser than the last. Frost-slick boulders jutted like broken teeth. Air thinned with every meter. Wind cut across the ridgeline in violent bursts, shredding sound and breath. But Kira Vale didn't slow. She led with her left hand, right arm strapped tight against her chest with field bandage and nylon webbing. Every step sent grinding ache through her ribs. She welcomed it, proof she wasn't dead yet. Behind her, 3 others followed. Corpsman Sweeney limping but moving. Rescue Tech Jakes, too quiet, probably concussed. Sergeant Raffi, youngest, gripping a length of helicopter cable like a lifeline. They'd used it to build their own lead line, looped and anchored on friction holds. Not pretty, but strong enough to trust. Kira reached the first vertical rise. Sheet of ice-blanketed stone. No handholds. She tested the surface with her boot. Solid ice over granite. She'd need to cut steps. She pulled her knife and started chopping. Small divots, just enough for toe purchase. Her shoulder screamed with each impact, but she kept the rhythm steady. Chip, chip, chip. 4 steps carved into ice. Then she jammed the metal toe of her boot into the lowest one, looped the cable around a fractured tree root, and pulled hard. It held. "You're not gonna like this next bit," she called down. "I didn't like the last bit," Sweeney muttered. Kira went first, testing each step before putting weight on it. The ice creaked, but held. She reached the top of the pitch and secured the cable to a solid anchor point, a boulder wedged between 2 rock faces. "One at a time," she ordered. "Clip in before you commit." Rafi came up second. Halfway up, his foot slipped. The cable went taut, catching him, but the sudden jerk made the anchor shift, just an inch, but enough to matter. Kira threw her weight against the boulder, pinning it in place with her good shoulder. Pain exploded through her ribs. She bit down hard, tasting copper, but held position. "Move!" she hissed. Rafi scrambled the last few feet and collapsed at the top, gasping. Sweeney came next, slower, favoring his injured leg. Then Jakes, who barely had the strength left to pull himself over the lip. They rested for 30 seconds. That was all they could spare. Below them, movement through the trees. The enemy was closing the gap. How much higher? Jakes asked, voice hollow. Kira scanned the terrain above. Another 100 meters, maybe more. The ridgeline was fracturing into a maze of ice chimneys and wind-carved channels. High enough to get signal, she said. That's all that matters. Halfway up, a crack split the wind. Pop, pop, gunfire. Suppressed, but close. Chips of ice exploded from the stone near her head. Sniper! They clung to the face of the mountain, exposed, nowhere to run. The second round hit 6 inches from Rafi's hand. He froze, eyes wide, breath coming in short gasps. Kira didn't hesitate. She yanked the cable tight, locking it around her waist and Rafi's. Then she reached into her vest, pulled out a thermal grenade. When this goes off, you climb, she said. Don't stop. Don't look back. She yanked the pin and tossed it down slope. The grenade bounced once, twice, exploded in flash of heat and smoke. Not lethal, but it lit up the valley like a flare, disorienting the shooter, buying them seconds. The sniper fire stopped. Kira pushed Rafi forward. Move! They climbed through the smoke, hands raw, lungs burning. Another pitch, then another. The cable frayed where it rubbed against sharp rock. Individual strands popping loose one by one. Rafi looked back at it, his face pale. That's not going to hold. It doesn't have to hold forever, Kira said. Just long enough. She turned to Rafi, met his eyes. You can't fly a broken bird, he said, voice shaking. She met his eyes. Then we climb. They reached the top 2 minutes later, bloodied, freezing, gasping, alive. The ridge opened into shallow outcrop, perfect for line of sight. Valley stretched below, burning wreckage of the pave hawk, now just a smear of smoke between the trees. Kira dropped to one knee, unclipped the IR strobe from her pack, triggered it 3 times. Short, long, long. Then she activated the laser pointer. Down below, enemy movement was visible. Figures crossing open snow, moving toward their previous position. She tracked them, steady hands calling the grid line to memory. 2 clusters, 8 total, southwest quadrant. Line 'em up. Behind her, Sweeney keyed his beacon to full pulse, pointed to the sky. Drone pass confirmed, he whispered. Predators overhead. Kira didn't smile. She just said one word. Fire. Above them, barely audible whine grew into a howl. A moment later, fire streaked downward in silence. Then thunder. The ridgeline behind them lit up orange, and the mountain answered. The sky had turned gold by the time the second bird arrived. Twin rotor CH-47. Chinook thundered over the ridge with its ramp already lowering, backlit by sunrise like a moving wall of wind and steel. Snow kicked up around Kira Vale and the remaining survivors as they signaled with the IR strobe, green pulse barely visible against the blast of dawn. Eyes on! Someone shouted from the open bay. We've got 4 upright. Rescue team dropped fast, boots crunching into ice. Weapons up, they formed a perimeter before one of them paused, looking at her. Are you Kira Vale? She didn't answer immediately. She was kneeling over the last survivor, wrapping gauze around his leg, her own face streaked with dried blood and ash. The medic tried again. Ma'am, your call sign? She stood slowly, slinging her half-empty rifle. Her vest still bore the scratch tag, VALE, faded but readable. Lieutenant Commander Vale, Naval Special Warfare Liaison Unit 7. The name hit like a dropped weight. One of the techs exhaled hard. Jesus Christ, you're the one who trained the overland evac pilots, the high-altitude egress program. She didn't correct him, just gave a curt nod. The base commander stepped off the rear ramp himself, clipboard under one arm, headset tucked around his neck. Older, gray at the temples, he studied her like she was a classified document that had just walked out of a fire. We didn't expect survivors, he said. You got them, Kira replied. And intel. She pulled a scorched data module from her side pouch, cracked casing but intact. Flight records, original route, terrain avoidance override, 2 redacted waypoints. Someone rerouted us into that corridor on purpose. The commander's expression shifted. He took the module carefully, turned it over in his hands. You're saying this wasn't mechanical failure. I'm saying our altitude deviation started 20 minutes before we took fire. The terrain radar didn't ghost, It was being jammed. Low level, sophisticated enough to look like equipment malfunction. And the backup system? She gestured to the module. Someone disabled the failsafe remotely. That would require access to command level encryption, she finished. I know, that's why I secured the module before the bird went down. This wasn't an ambush. It was an assassination. The commander's jaw tightened. Who was the target? Could have been me. Could have been someone else on the manifest. Or maybe they just wanted the flight path data to refine their next strike. She pulled out a folded paper from her vest, the original flight plan, water damaged but readable. But this shows the reroute came from inside the wire. Someone at Bagram or higher. Behind them, the Chinook's engines roared. Snow blew sideways. Time was short. Signal confirms that Ridge Strike took out a weapons team, the commander added. Predator ID'd remains of at least 3 anti-air emplacements, already mapping the network behind it. If what you're saying is true, it's true, Kira said. And whoever set this up is still out there, still has access, still deciding who flies where. The weight of that hung between them. She didn't smile. Then keep going. Evac crew's ready, the medic said, stepping forward with the stretcher. I'm not here to lie down, she said, brushing past. She helped lift one of the wounded into the bay herself, eyes scanning every strap, every tourniquet. When the last of the crew was aboard, she turned and faced the valley one more time, smoke curling from the impact site, ridge behind them blackened by fire. Rafi leaned out from the ramp watching her. We good? She didn't look at him. Not flying, she said, stepping onto the ramp. Just rising. The doors sealed. The bird lifted. Snow swirled beneath them, ash mixing with frost. She stood near the bulkhead, hands steady, face unreadable. She hadn't flown home. She'd climbed there. Could you survive a helicopter crash at 10,000 feet and still climb into the fight instead of waiting for help? Would you lead a rescue with broken ribs, one arm, and zero air cover? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story reminded you what real training and grit look like, hit that like button, subscribe, and make sure the bell icon is turned on so you never miss the next mission. Share this video with someone who still thinks flight depends on wings. And I'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place, with a brand new story already waiting for you. Your mission continues.